What do they do in blue zones that allows the people to live longer and healthier lives?
So the Blue Zone story, first of all, it's an interesting tale for those who don't know it. Dan Buettner, a National Geographic fellow, discovered the Blue Zones, had the National Geographic resources behind him to do good ethnography and tell us about these 5 populations around the world that live to 100 much more often than any of the rest of us, that tend not to get chronic disease nearly as often as all the rest of us, and that at the end of it all go gentle into that good night. So, the Blue Zone blessings would be something like live to be 102, stay vital and active till the very end, go to sleep one night, and just not wake up the next morning. It's beautiful. We should all be so fortunate. And the reason they're called Blue Zones is this was National Geographic. They're into maps. They had a map on the wall. They were talking about where these populations were. They had a blue Sharpie. And 5 of them got circled with the blue Sharpie. So there was Ikaria, Greece, and Sardinia, Italy, and Okinawa, Japan, and Loma Linda, California, and the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica. And they all got circled in a blue Sharpie, and they've been Blue Zones ever since, not for a better reason than that. But they're really very important because they're populations that have been enjoying a bounty of years in life and life in years for generation after generation. And now their lifestyles have been very assiduously mapped for us by Dan and his colleagues. And the basic formula I tend to express is feet, forks, fingers, sleep, stress, and love. I'm a past president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and I argued during my tenure as president that is the 6-cylinder engine of lifestyle as medicine. So feet is physical activity, forks our dietary patterns, fingers, don't ever do that, so avoid toxins, particularly tobacco, but also excess alcohol. Sleep, we need to make sure we get enough. Stress, we need to make sure we don't have too much. And love, we need strong social interactions. Dan puts it slightly differently, but we're saying much the same thing. So the Blue Zones are characterized by diets of real food, not too much, mostly plants, as Michael Pollan put it, routine physical activity, generally low exposure to toxins, although some of them drink a fair amount of wine, but they tend not to smoke. They get enough good sleep. They're not stressed out. Very strong social interactions. Dan would add spirituality in the mix. Many of them have a spiritual connection as well to one another and to the greater providence. But it's part of the cultural glue, so strong sense of community. And what I think is really important about the Blue Zones is that formula is very consistent among these 5 extremely diverse populations. But there's another critical lesson here for us. And it's an argument for us not being too dogmatic. And it's an argument for us to acknowledge that on the common ground of truth, there are variable patches, and we could choose the one we favor and still be on common ground. So in Ikaria, Greece, and Sardinia, Italy, first of all, both of these populations are omnivores. They're not vegan. They don't eat plant-exclusive diets. They just eat plant-predominant diets. And they eat very high-fat diets. But the fat is coming from nuts and seeds, olives, avocados, fatty fish, and extra virgin olive oil. And they live to be 100 routinely, and they don't get chronic disease, and they don't get dementia, and they routinely die in their sleep. So they're telling us that that pattern is on the common ground of truths we can all share about the power of lifestyle as medicine. In Loma Linda, California, the Seventh-day Adventists tend to be vegan or vegetarian. Their diets range in fat content from low to moderate. So again, some range there, but more argument that, okay, so a relatively low-fat and often vegan diet can be the answer too. In Okinawa, Japan, the diet is traditionally very low in fat, but not vegan. It includes in particular fish and seafood, very small amounts of other meat. So again, an argument that there's yet another variant. And in Costa Rica, the diet is also omnivorous, slightly shifted toward a reliance on a native tuber that's a mainstay. But they're more alike than different. So I think the Blue Zone experience tells us a lot about the commonalities of basic lifestyle pattern that's good for human health. It's also a vivid illustration of the opportunity for variations on a common theme.
Is it correct that tobacco, poor diet, and lack of physical activity are the cause in 80% of premature deaths?
It is correct. And not only is it correct, it's really the inspiration for my career. My dad's a cardiologist, very traditional practitioner, although very focused on lifestyle issues, and more so since my career got going, and we sort of came together on that issue. But I trained in internal medicine. I thought I was going to be either an internist or some kind of specialist that took care of sick people my whole career. And while I was training in internal medicine, and during that time you're in the hospital over 100 hours a week and taking care of the desperately sick people who are in the hospital, the pattern overwhelmed me. I felt like I was one of the king's horses and one of the king's men. I thought, yeah, I know how that story ends. We're never going to restore vitality. These are people who are horribly sick. They've had strokes, they've had heart attacks, they have cancer, they have diabetes, they have all sorts of terrible things, in some cases infectious diseases that were avoidable. And most of this stuff never needed to happen. And while I want to be there at the bedside, I want to be able to render acute care at an hour of urgent need, I also can't stand idly by and wait for the next cohort and the next and the next to succumb to all of these same ills. So I started shopping around for what I could do about that and found my way into preventive medicine and went to Yale to do my training in preventive medicine, public health, and had been at Yale ever since for a span of 30 years, only recently leaving. And I completed my training in preventive medicine, public health at Yale in 1993. As best I can recall, I graduated in June. And I believe it was September that a paper came out in the Journal of the American Medical Association entitled Actual Causes of Death in the United States. I think one of the most significant publications in the modern era by two leading epidemiologists, Mike McGinnis and Bill Foege. And having built, on, of course, on the work of others and labored for a couple of years to wrestle all of the epidemiologic data under control, they were enumerating the underlying root explanations for all of the premature deaths that occur in this country every year. We're all going to die eventually. So preventing death isn't really the goal. Getting death to wait for the fullness of time is the goal. So they were looking at that disparity, death before it ought to happen. And they listed 10 factors in that paper that, when they were aggregated, accounted for almost all of the premature deaths in the United States every year, but for a rounding error, almost all of them. And everything on that list in 1993 was modifiable then, let alone now, a quarter century later. It tells us something really profoundly important. Knowledge isn't power. Knowledge is necessary for power. Knowledge is prerequisite, but there's a translational step to turn what we know into what we routinely do, and we have yet to take it with regard to the power of McGinnis and Foege's full list and lifestyle as medicine. But for my purposes, so there were factors on that original list that were all about the body politic. Environmental toxins, for example. That's not something an individual can really fix. We need collective action. We need government. There were factors related to motor vehicles and so forth, and some of those are best engineered solutions as opposed to individual behavior. But the first 3 entries on the list of 10, all alone, accounted for 80% of the premature deaths in our country every year. And this was true back in 1993. It's still pretty much true today. And those 3 factors were tobacco, poor diet, and lack of physical activity. Bad use of feet, forks, and fingers. 80% of the premature deaths in our country every year, just those 3 factors. That's still true today, but something has changed. We're smoking a lot less, and so tobacco is no longer number 1. Diet is. The number 1 leading cause of premature death and chronic misery in our country and culture is something that should be a source of sustenance and nourishment. It's the construction material for the growing bodies of children we love. It's what operates this unbelievable machine we call our body. It's the fuel. And we have so corrupted it that it is the leading cause of premature death and chronic disease. That's a travesty.